A bit about me. I'm Daniel Izquierdo. I've been around. I'm the CEO of Bitergia. My background is computer science, and then we've been doing in Bitergia development analytics for the last basically 14 years. So we gather all the data available in open source projects or proprietary software, and then we make sense with this. We bring basically business intelligence to upper management. So probably you're aware of this table, right? With the data on, well, these are the main tracking the top developers populations, specifically in GitHub. There are some well-known players, United States, India, China, and others. What is interesting here, and this is coming from Octobers in this case, is that this is not happening in other cases with the same data set coming from GitHub. So this is, again, the innovation graph. Probably you're aware of this. And the innovation graph for Q3 2025 is stating like, well, we have European Union, some aggregation of European Union, USA, we have India, and then suddenly China disappears from here. So we have Brazil, we have Deutschland, Germany, and other countries. So the thing is that GitHub is basically, depending on how the analysis is done, is using different approaches. And specifically, the problem with this is that they are mainly using IP addresses. So basically, that means whatever is done behind the scenes using a VPN, all that data is lost. So then in terms of identities, you all have, I assume, an identity in different platforms like GitHub or GitLab, probably in the mailing list or some Discord or so. So you have different identities. And then in China specifically, which is the point for today, what happens is that most of the people are basically using VPN, because if not, there's a big firewall and they cannot literally go out. So they cannot use Google services. They cannot use Microsoft services unless you have such VPN and you're allowed because you work in a certain corporation. So this study, by the way, was done with people within China. So they have access to Git, which is basically the platform, which is the same as GitHub, but in China. So they are, again, building their own technological stack with their own platform. In part, I guess, to avoid sanctions from the US or, GitHub choke point or so. So the point here is that we have China around this number, which is this green line. And then, let's say, if you want to see this from a more industrial or research question, you can think of, okay, where is China here? So then we were doing some analysis. We had some challenges, of course, in general. And then from a Chinese perspective, it was like, okay, this is kind of unfair because we cannot see the reality of China. In other words, if any of you is making investment decisions, if you are thinking of where the talent is coming from, if you are thinking of hiring someone from a certain region in China or the other way around, going to China and doing investments, you don't have that intelligence. So this data is basically to try to fill this gap. There are some challenges, as we say. Basically, the idea is to start having certain data strategy gathering. So again, going to the discussion point of that you need to have the right data. And with all the AI, let me call it bubble perhaps, the problem is that we really need the right data behind whatever decisions you are using or whatever you are using to feed the artificial intelligence. Some numbers here, improvements based on OSS Compass. OSS Compass is an open source project. This is being developed in GitHub in this case. They are relying on chaos technology. That's why that's the connection, let's say. And what we have are basically that understanding. So we try to go through the time zone verification. Basically, when you are doing a commit, you are stating basically who you are. So you will know that we know who is doing what, when, and where. Exactly whatever files, projects out there, and all of this information is public. The main problem or challenge from a Git perspective is that the API is public, but there is the firewall. So basically, it's kind of technically impossible to gather all the data from Git. So some numbers, this is just to give you an idea about the numbers, evolution, etc. And then this is basically where we come from with a GitHub, and then having the analysis, improving identities, time zone, affiliations, and then adding basically Git information. So suddenly you see that China is pretty close to India. So this is basically European Union, United States, India, and then we have China. Doesn't matter that much about the numbers, right? But the point is that this is the reality of China. So basically, again, going to the data quality perspective, there was an error of almost 80%. So that's a super big error, right? And of course, GitHub is just focusing on GitHub. which is kind of the platform by default. But anyway, it's interesting to have such data. So then now we know where China is, right, in terms of producing software. So then the next question we had is, okay, because I'm in Europe, and then this guy Yehui from OSS Compass is in China, we were wondering how do we compare each other, and that's basically where we are. And from given this geopolitics friction and everything, and from an open source perspective, where are the places where perhaps both regions could collaborate, both regions are complementary, and where both regions can see and find the talent that they need for different perspectives. All this information is in this report that was released last year. They are releasing a new one this year. This is in Chinese, but AI is kind of doing a good job translating everything. So you can basically download and ship it to whatever AI. Again, they will release and update all the numbers for 2025. So more things in terms of numbers and everything. So we have some numbers. Don't worry that much about them. So we know that we have millions of projects. We know that we have millions of developers, and we know that we are a global community. So it's not anymore a discussion between USA and Europe. It's basically we have India, we have Brazil, we have China. So we have these big players, and the question is basically how to make all of this more collaborative. So according to the numbers from OSS Compass, Europe is driving this global open source collaboration. Even more depending on how we want to bring United Kingdom and European Union, so it could be even bigger, and both together at least. And that's that only to say that again, we all have the talent, because sometimes it's in Europe, I have the feeling that we are doing this comparison like, well, US, they have all this knowledge, this technology, China, they have all this and that, but we have the purchase power, can create the standards, we have the talent to produce the software, so then let's do it, right? Let's do some things. Some interesting thoughts, and then just for comparison, Europe and China, this is again coming from August last year. So this is the million of commits, year-over-year growth, and then the million of active projects. Some numbers, they are comparable probably, which is probably a bit more interesting. Let me go first to this, is the ICT, the number of ICT employees. Where in Europe is slightly bigger, but then it's true that China is still developing. So it's at some point will be a bigger country with a bigger number of ICT employees. And they are now a comparable stage probably from the European perspective. What is probably what they are lacking at some point is the following, going back to the chart. So this chart is showing for a certain definition, import-export for specifically activity in different projects. So assuming that we agree on a definition of what is a European project, assuming we agree that we know what the definition of a European developer is, so then there are some activities that are basically happening between mainly Europe and USA. So basically the taller, the higher, sorry, the bar, the better. That means that there is more contributions from European developers in US technology, open source projects again, and the other way around, US developers coming to Europe. So basically it's importing, exporting talent, we can say. If you check basically China, which is the red one here, and India is happening kind of the same, but specifically in China, this import-export is super low. So we were wondering, why is this happening? Of course, there is the language barrier, which is typically one of the main barriers for contributing to other open source projects. But then it's interesting from different perspectives. And specifically, I would say, the main one is that there is all of this space basically for contribution, for collaboration. That is not happening. So there is that opportunity there. We just need to make this happen, right? At least if we want to keep having, stop having a fragmented open source community and trying to fund, the basics of all of this. Some data, so Germany and France in Europe are mainly driving everything, or they are the biggest countries, so that's kind of expected. Something that may not be that well known is basically leading regions in China. So we have Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Hangzhou. What makes sense probably because most of the population is in the seaside of China. But even though those are the main tech places as well, probably. So, we went over these numbers, and then I wanted to share this. So then the next thing that we did was to compare, okay, let's characterize the type of projects we have with respect to a certain domain or kind of technology. Again, this is 23, 24, and then some growth over year. So going to the left, we have Europe. So then we are mainly focusing on front-end development framework operating systems. But then at the same time, we are basically growing much faster, specifically in operating systems, blockchain, in this case, mobile applications. We focus on China, so we can have the same numbers basically. But then in the case of China, they are investing way more or spending way more if compared to the number of developers on artificial intelligence, front-end and operating systems, with specifically special growth in the case of chips. So now what does it mean for all of us? So basically, I see that there is value in all of this when making investment decisions. Like, okay, I would like to go to China with my company. Where can I find the people that really know about artificial intelligence or operating systems or so? Or the other way around, you know about OpenEuler, OpenHarmony, and other open source projects from China. They might be interested in coming to Europe and opening the market. I assume they are interested. So then they have a lot of talent here. So in somehow, both markets are complementary. How to do, what to do, the lack of open governance in the case of Chinese projects and everything, the language barriers, that's something to resolve. But definitely there is a space for such collaboration. So some initial conclusions based on the data is, well, definitely there is a way larger, deeper open source culture in the case of Europe. China is still working on that, and that's happening. We have a more mature ecosystem, I assume, because of the corporations that are consuming and producing open source. And then somehow China has this potential to basically grow as soon as they have more and more ICT employees, and growing faster in some incipient markets. So they have somehow the flexibility to go to edge technology and say, I can go there, I put the resources. They are way more government driven, of course, but that's how they work. I mean, that's it. So then the discussion about complementary markets, mostly blockchain, operating systems, and other spaces in the case of Europe, other kind of technologies, including artificial intelligence. My question to you is what we can learn from them? I'm not an artificial intelligence developer, but we can probably learn a lot from how they are producing stuff. Everything is open source. Yeah, and well, probably the last one is how much do we want to reinvent the wheel in both parties, right? Open discussion. So first, we need to trust each other, and that's something to deal. It's a different culture. It's a different way of doing things. It's a different way of thinking. Producing software is everything, and I assume they will see us in a similar place. So how can we deal with all of these, perhaps mainly cultural differences in how to approach things? Political environment, being sometimes like yes, but no, but yes, and then later no, you never know. There is a market distortion, like the European Union is specifically bringing that topic, like, well, they are bringing a lot of money to certain industries, like for instance, automotive, so this is not fair to other automotive industries in Europe. Export control, specifically in Europe, AI control, export control in the case of China. So that's all that I'm not directly involved in the conversations, of course. And then an open call. If you are interested in learning more or having access to this data or so, well, let me know. So they are specifically here. You have Yahui, who is the other author when we were doing these numbers, and me. We are happy to share the data and give you access and have further conversations. And this is it. Thank you.
You mentioned a little bit the language issues. So first question is that are the Chinese language projects included, and do you have any statistics like how big percentage of the technical documentation of the projects or the project commit messages or whatever are in Chinese and English from China?
I don't have that now. I could have that probably. But then language barrier is basically working in both sides. So depending where you go, well, I don't speak Chinese, and sometimes the communication channel is hard for me with them because they don't speak much English. When my English is also, so that depends on those processes. Then
basically the Chinese language projects are included in all of this.
Oh yeah. Specifically from ET, I assume that 90% of them probably are in China. More questions?
When Europe does things like tariffing Chinese cars, Chinese EVs, for example, do you think that could ruin any kind of way we could do things like open source collaboration between two continents?
So there is this example at the Linux kernel where publicly, I don't remember, one of the developers claimed that he was not allowed because he was under USA jurisdiction to collaborate in private with Huawei. And then that there were some specific contributions from Huawei developers on export file system that couldn't be accepted. And then we have the removal of some Russian developers because of the same reason. So likely yes. That's geopolitics. So in somehow we are all under the law of our different countries, and basically the law is affecting us even if we don't live in such countries. So that's the situation. I don't know how much this may happen.
Obviously, the AI stuff is going really, really fast, right, in China. I know you do health indexes in terms of the sustainability of those kind of ecosystems of private. Is there any kind of winners kind of starting to emerge from there in terms of projects?
I don't know, but it's true. So I don't have the data now, and I don't have I could probably find the answer. But my feeling is that there is they try and fail. It's like super fast, and then they move people or whatever. And then if there is a problem, my little experience in China is that they bring more people, so that's it. And then they try to work it and move forward in that way. But I don't have an answer to the question.
I suppose there are many researchers interested in those data and analyzing this. Is there some kind of network of research labs studying the same kind of stuff?
There is in China specifically. So the OSS Compass is an open source project. They have part of the data already published, but then you only have the aggregated data. So somehow you need to know, there is still a process to put kind of the quality stamp, the process, like I really trust the data. That's something that I have not done personally, I would like to do. And then, but there are specific researchers and universities in China that they are already using the data from Peking University or Nanjing and others. They are part of the board of OSS Compass, so that's why I know that. There was a question.
You actually asked the same question.
Okay, but I guess they would be happy to open the discussion with that. I mean, I know at least that they are willing to share this with the rest of the world and say, okay, this is the reality of open source in China.
So the US has passed a law where the software that is made in China and it's inside a vehicle, you cannot sell that car in the US anymore unless it's open source software, right? And China is very likely to, retribute and pass the same law. That US made software, you cannot sell the car, or I guess it's not just cars, other things as well, in China anymore. So that means if you're, let's say as a European automotive company, you want to sell your cars in both markets, these parts have to be open source software. So it's not in that regard, it's not even like an option anymore. It is mandatory. And if you buy software in China, it's like, you can only buy it if it's open source or develop it in open source, and then because otherwise we can't use it in the car.
Question for you. How is the trend in Mercedes with that respect?
How is what?
The trend in Mercedes, if you can say.
What do you mean the trend?
So I know, so you have claimed that you have 3,000 open source components in the infotainment system.
Yeah.
But what about the rest of the car?
Well, the rest of the car, all of it will never be open source, right? But so certain, as you just mentioned, in our new, the one model before S-Class is more than 3,000 open source components, and they're all disclosed and everything. But so proprietary software from China, you can't have it in the car. And same with US. And so that's something we're looking into because.
Sorry, it's another question about language. And I don't mean to be making this too difficult. You may not have the answer to this. But my guess is that the Chinese language character set means that it's difficult. There's limited programming languages in the Chinese character set. There are some, I believe. But I'm wondering whether there's anybody being looked at the computability in terms of the performance of languages in that character set versus the English character set, which is obviously much simpler. I don't know if anybody's looked at that or aware of that.
Any researchers in the room? That's an interesting question.
Because I wonder if your analysis was able to look at programming languages that they're using in China.
Probably we could. I mean, at the end, we have access to, so you have access to the Git repositories, and that means that you have access to literally the extension of the file that you're using, so you know the programming language. You can track.
That would be interesting to know.
Yeah.
The AI models that were using Chinese tokens were sometimes coming out, so that's why we're seeing Chinese tokens coming out from some of the models, because internally they were using Chinese to express more succinctly ideas. We might have multiple ways to express ideas.
So does that suggest the Chinese language may be more performant?
Anecdotally, I've seen that things using Chinese character sets go faster. That things outputting things in Chinese character sets, they tend to actually process much faster, to the extent that I've seen people willingly choosing the Chinese options on some software for some machines, because that makes the entire machine just operate faster, just spit out the logs faster.
Less tokens,
Yeah,
more concise.
Less characters.